this video I'm going to be drawing in this sketchbook, which is my university book, where I've mainly done life drawing and some master's studies and things like that. It's got bits of different things that I've tried over a couple of years, but in this one I'm going to be doing an ink drawing. I'm going to be using this fountain pen, so I'll give it a go and show you the results. Okay, so in this video I'm going to be using my second year university sketchbook, and this carried on into the third year as well. Most of this sketchbook is pencil drawings of different things, and a lot of them are pencil drawings of either life drawing sessions, or one of them was of my cafetiere, coffee pot, my percolator, sorry, not cafetiere, my percolator on my window ledge. And then I had a drawing in there of a magic money tree, because in politics over here they talk about how there isn't a magic money tree and things like that. Not many ink drawings went in this book, and this was a specific point where I sat down and felt like doing an ink drawing, so that's what I did. Now the rest of this book will probably be doing the same thing as well, because I do like the direction which the book took. It tells a story, with the majority of the book being either coloured pencils, coloured pastels, or pencil, charcoal and bits of acrylic. Having this fountain pen illustration or sketch or doodle or whatever you want to call it was a bit of a breath of fresh air for me. The bits of ink drawings that I have done in the book was, I did do a drawing in biro, and I also did a sketch in marker pens, like drying marker pens, ones which were really old, and that was quite nice as well. That was a still life. And I did film it, but I didn't film it very well, but I might still upload it just because it's one of the nicer drawings out of this book, and since it was on camera, I may as well see if I can put together a video where you can see the process. But this is one of the drawings where I'm glad that I did film it, because usually when I do illustration or drawing like this, it's when I'm feeling quite loose and, without any pressure, and because it's just an outlet to draw like this, and then I end up wishing that I'd filmed it. So with this, thankfully, I did have the camera rolling, and I rarely use a fountain pen, and I really enjoy drawing with a fountain pen. When I do use one, I've really liked the feel of it, just like I really enjoy dip pens. I know that I've spoken to professional artists that I really admire, and they've told me that they're too impatient to keep dipping the pen. They find it really, they just want a continuous stream of ink, and I understand that. But I think I'm really conscious of dipping the pen and having the ink run out anyway, so I think it doesn't really affect me in the same way, where I feel having a dip pen is just reassurance that I can keep loading it up with more ink periodically, and it gives me a moment's pause to evaluate the marks that I've just made. So the concept here is more to do with the studies that I was doing at the time. I was studying for writing a dissertation, and I had a huge stack of books that I was reading through and really suffering through the reading, not because I don't enjoy reading, because I do, but because the reading was quite dense and the time frame was really short, and it felt quite unfair how it was dropped on us in the way that it was by the university. So it was an outlet for that frustration. And this illustration is quite a playful one, but it is trying to express something where I was actually quite stressed out about what I was going through, because I'd be reading books that are incredibly dense as far as the subject matter, and the text would be just an onslaught of repeated, how do you explain it? Just really high concept things, or not even high concept. I don't know how to explain it. Just really, really philosophical, I suppose, is the word. Yeah, it's kind of philosophical concepts that were being communicated in these books, which sounds quite interesting. But when I was reading it, it was just mind-numbing, because you'd read one page and then that page would feel as though it had been repeated for the next, in fact, not even the page, you'd read a sentence and it'd feel as though it had been repeated for several pages, and I'd read those several pages several times in case I'd missed the point. But every time I reread them, I just got the impression that it was the same sentence being repeated over and over again. I even took photographs of these pages because I found it so unbelievable what I was seeing. And I've read several books that aren't novels or, fiction books, and I've read things which are fairly academic, and they just weren't like this. So it was a real challenge at this point. So doing this drawing was just a way to breathe and to relax. I really enjoy this pen on this type of paper as well, because this type of paper it's not the best quality sketchbook. It's a bit rough, but it means that it gives me the freedom of not being too precious over the marks, and knowing that it's going to be slightly, scribbly, and just have a Quentin Blake sort of approach to it, where the imperfections should add something to it, as opposed to being something where I feel self-conscious about the marks I'm making, which is always nice when you can feel free to just wander along a drawing with the line and let the page become filled up with the mark making. The idea was that I'd been digesting so much information from these books that I'd fallen head first into the text. And although I think I may have aphantasia, and I'm still hesitant to say that I have it, even though I can't conjure an image in my imagination, which is pretty much the definition of aphantasia, I'm still hesitant to say I have it, because I'm someone who, unless I'm officially diagnosed with something, I'm really reluctant to claim to have it. And I don't know if you can get officially diagnosed with aphantasia, because I don't know how they can diagnose that and confirm that you have it. And it would appear that I don't have it if I can draw from imagination, but it's not really the way that I draw. I have talked to someone who introduced me to the idea of aphantasia about this by telling her that the idea for my drawing from imagination like this is more like a concept. It's more like if I were to tell you a story of walking to a post office, and when I went into the post office, you have some racking with envelopes and things on it. It's two-sided racking, so you can walk all the way around it. You can picture that non-visually, if you like, in your head, where you just picture the concept, you just follow along, just as if I was saying I'd entered a building with lifts or elevators, and I walk over to the lifts at the one side of the lobby, and I go up to the third floor, and every room looks the same, and the carpeting's this big heavy patterned thing, and all the walls are white, and you know what I'm talking about, the concept without having to see the image. So that's how I draw pictures, really. I don't have the picture in my head, but I have the concept, and I can work out a basic shape without projecting that shape in an image in my mind, because I can't do that. When people say to try and picture an apple in your head, I was fooling myself thinking that I was doing that, but I wasn't. I was just thinking of the concept of an apple, and when people said, "What colour is it?" I'd say green with a slight red part on the side, and I'd be able to describe an apple because it's the concept of an apple as opposed to the visual image. I don't know if that makes sense to you, but that's honestly how I tried to communicate to this friend of mine how my imagination works regarding visual imagery. So that's how I do pictures like this, is to just think of the imagery. I wish I could visually project something, because I think it would make it much more easy to refine and to add details and to take things away and to really plan things out if you could imagine it. But I can't imagine things like this, so I just conjure a concept and run with that. I quite like the fact that this is line work for the majority of the drawing. I do add bits of hatching just as I have on the inside of the books there to show depth, but the majority of the image is just a solid line, similar to a rotary pen, which I became familiar with because of Peter Draws, and I really appreciate his drawing because of his rotary pen images really appeal to me. Now, I don't do very much with rotary pens, even though I have bought a set of them, but I will do more of them if I get the opportunity, because much like the fountain pen, I just have a connection to it, where it feels like something which I could quite happily spend time with. So at the moment I'm just trying to plot out parts of the desk. On the left hand, I cut part of the hand out to make it slightly more narrow, and I made that into a mouse, which is being obscured by my hand. So then beneath the mouse, I put the suggestion of a mouse pad, and on my right hand, which you can see in the distance there, I'm trying to put the suggestion of a keyboard. It's not especially obvious necessarily on the screen, but in the sketchbook you can kind of see what I'm doing, especially when I start to put more objects and parts of the drawing together. But at this point I'm simply building up the blocking so that I've got enough of the shape developed, and there becomes a scene from this environment that I'm trying to design. I don't know if you could hear that noise then, but someone watching a film, quite a loud volume, so excuse me if you can hear any noise in the background. I've tried to turn off everything in my room to make sure that there's no buzzing or humming sound, which I did have a problem with. I actually recorded this voiceover before this one. I had a first take, this is the second take, and the first take I hadn't realised that a fish tank in my room, I had the pump going. And I had to make a decision of, do I just upload it anyway because I've just done a voiceover, or should I re-record it? And for several reasons I decided to re-record it. One being the buzzing and the other being the tone of the voiceover, where I was really just going through what was on my mind and what my complaints were at the time whilst I was drawing this, and I think it was all a bit too negative, so I thought it'd be quite nice to try and record this and force myself to be less negative on the voiceover, because it's so easy to go back into that state of mind. And as much as I really like this drawing, it does take me back to the place where I was when I drew it, and it's part of the reason why I really like the drawing, is that it's not the reading part, it's what was surrounding that, really, with the university course, which I was really dissatisfied with. And that's what my first voiceover really went into, was, oh, this wasn't any good, and that was really annoying, and this was really, whatever, just too much moaning. And that was another reason why I thought, I'll turn off the pump on the fish tank temporarily whilst I record this voiceover, and I will change the tone of this voiceover. So believe it or not, this is the positive version. I don't know if it sounds positive or not, but this is me trying to stay in a more optimistic tone. So this sketchbook goes from being bits of, I suppose, experiments to an extent, just not very enthusiastic explorations into mark making or colour, coloured kind of combinations on the page, and then into several ink drawings, which they don't encourage at university, but I just find solace in. So when I'd done one drawing in this sketchbook before this page, where I was venting frustration of rejoining the third year, I found it quite natural to follow it on with this drawing, venting my frustration of the research for a dissertation that I was working on at the time. I normally don't do drawings like this during university. I've done almost no ink drawings. I've really suffered in my ability to draw and my ability to paint because of the direction of the course. But when it comes to doing drawings, sometimes you can really find a nice outlet for it. So this was one of those occasions where it was just something which I needed to help me feel like I could really breathe again. But yeah, it is just picking away at bits of an environment and trying to make it look as 3D as possible and as believable of a scene as you can. And even though it stays in that cartoon reality, I think there's a bit of a sense of depth with the books. You can see a curvature of my monitor, which was my PC monitor, and bits of the desk. I tried to get a stool, even though I don't have a stool like that. I also don't wear a watch, but it's kind of me, even though that's not what my hair was like. It's more how I felt in my mind, my head going through the books, trying to digest the contents, as opposed to it being a realistic depiction of me doing it. So I think that everyone that you make art about, if you're drawing from imagination especially, it's part of yourself that you're describing in the subject. That could be true anyway. That's what I've heard, and I believe that's possibly true. And for this drawing, I imagine that that's just as true as with any other drawing. For the desk, I did this little hinge on the side, this little diagonal bracket, and I thought that would be quite a nice addition instead of just doing 4 legs to a desk. And it turns out that the desk I have at the moment does have a little diagonal bracket like that, holding it together. Not exactly like that, but more similar than what I had when I drew this drawing, which I wasn't using a desk like that. So that's just coincidental, but I thought it was worth mentioning, because if you're drawing things like desks, it's worth taking a moment to decide whether or not you want a desk to have just 4 legs and a top, or whether you want it to have a different type of design that could be slightly more interesting. For me, I find it more interesting anyway, just to have that that part to it, that diagonal mark, just because diagonals are nice in drawings as well. Different angles, different directions, and different bits of windows and shapes. I say windows, I just mean in that diagonal bracket you've got a gap in there, so filling that gap up will make a little window into the space behind it. Anything that shows depth really is what I find more interesting in a drawing. Now this part of it is just going to be trying to fill up the desk with bits of objects and trying to think of the random assortment of items that you can find cluttered on your desktop. It seems easy, just a few pens and pencils, but you'd be surprised at how quickly you run out of shapes and things that you think will be believable and worth drawing. So a lot of them turn into the same little sticks that I draw here, but I tried to make that into a case instead. Sometimes glance up to try and think, what do I have on my desk? But I do try to reinforce the drawing being from imagination as opposed to being from reference, because if I do it from imagination and then I start to look up and use reference, I feel as though I've cheated. And I haven't. There's no test being taken. There's no one who pats you on the back saying, well done, it's all from imagination. It doesn't make any difference. If not, it'd make it better to draw some from reference, probably, because you're combining one thing with another, which usually adds to something. But I don't know, it's a strange rule that I impose upon myself, that I need to draw all of it straight out of my mind to see how much I can do. It's not a bad thing necessarily, but I think that I'm too hard on myself that way. It doesn't necessarily make things better, and I think that I could really learn a lot from loosening some of those constraints on my drawing and concept building, because that is something which could yield different results. But trying to remember as many details as possible is usually a good thing. just like the seam of the trousers that I'm trying to do on the outside. I don't always include that in bits of seams for the t-shirt. I try to remember stitching if I can, and bits of seams, because that can really add to something, but sometimes it doesn't. It's hard. You've got to really take that risk sometimes and try to learn from what works and what doesn't from your experience. It's hard to judge. Just like this could be a line drawing and it could stay there. I could start drawing on the right hand side to try and balance the page, or I could continue on the left. You've just got to weigh this up for yourself and see what you think will work right, or what your impulse leads you to. Now, unfortunately, part of this drawing is cut off at the bottom of the screen where I'm drawing the legs of the stool, but you'll be able to see that at the end where I lift the pad up, and it is literally just fiddling around with bits of shapes for the wheels and the legs at the bottom of the stool, just as this is trying to pick away at the legs of the table or the desk. And it's not especially detailed or masterful, but it's the little bits all put together that make the whole thing complete. I continue with the blocking behind the monitor here. I think this is just as important as anything else, because if you do this and it works, then you've successfully built up an environment. If it doesn't work, then the advantage to gain is trying to remember it would have been better with space behind it. There are some people who I watch drawing online where I prefer their drawing long before it's finished, and I wish they would have stopped. And I try to learn from that, but at the same time I'm sure I'm making the same mistakes myself, where I continue with a drawing where it was much better 5 minutes in, or just earlier when there was a lot more space around the drawing. It's a hard lesson to learn, because once you've gone too far there's no stripping it back. But it's not something where I've really felt any real problem with it. I suppose it's because it's not for commission work. At the moment it's all just for drawing, for the knowledge, for the experience. And it's not anything to do with someone's asked me for something and I've not delivered it because I've put in too much detail. That is something I'm yet to do. Kind of dreading, but also looking forward to, because I'd love to earn a living from doing drawing like this. But at the moment it's literally just because it's the only thing that I want to do, is drawing with black ink. At the same time, I have a real yearning to try and get better at painting. It's why I started this course, as I was hoping to get better at drawing with a pencil and painting with a brush, and they teach none of those things at my university. But in order to keep this voiceover remaining optimistic and more positive than the first take, I won't go into detail about that. I will maybe on a podcast or somewhere else, but it did just start to sound depressing when I finished the first voiceover. I thought, wow, that's gonna bring down this whole drawing. Just me belly aching about my experiences at university. So instead, I decided to try to think about what's going to be interesting as far as telling you the choices in this video. One of the choices that I've made is, for shading, I've decided to go with diagonal hatch lines, which I quite like because it's light and it's still creating a mid-tone shadow to suggest a sense of depth and potentially a light source in the room. It's also really enjoyable and therapeutic. I mean, I could quite happily just sit and do hatching for hours with a pen like this, because it's got a metal nib and it's just lovely to feel the texture against the paper, and that also makes this process a lot easier. It's part of the therapy of doing drawings like this for me, is to start hatching in bits of shadow and creating that sense of depth in the drawing. It's a fine balance, just like everything else. can go too far and go wrong, and I don't always know where to hatch. And when I look at other people's illustration, I always marvel at how well they create this patchwork of lines in order to create texture and shadow and shape and depth. I love it. But I'm an amateur at the moment, so I'm just trying to build up my experience and knowledge on how to do things like this. Trying to embrace some of the wobbly lines and the mistakes, much like a Quentin Blake illustration. Parts of this are drawn quite wrong, but at the end, the final result, I think it doesn't look incorrect to me, because it's part of a whole. I don't know if that makes sense. It's part of the actual thing. I don't really want to change it. I think I would do if it were digital. I don't really do digital illustration. I should, but I don't enjoy it. It's nothing like this to me. I really like the physical, tangible aspect of drawing with ink. So I might have to make some changes in order to make the most out of digital illustration. See if I can find some of this enthusiasm that I have for the ink on the paper and the pen nib on the page in the stylus on the... I think they've got textured sheets that you can put on top of your screen in order to get some type of, similarity between the two, where it's more enjoyable to draw on. Now all of this is just adding bits of hatching here and there, like I say, but I do add darker shadow, patches of almost black, which bleeds through to the other side of the page and onto the next page. But that's not the worst thing in the world, and it's not bleeding like it would if it were a big marker pen. So it's more just trying to finish up and add something where it makes the drawing stand out a bit more. And I think that's what it does. When you add this, and now that I've done some hatching, I'm now just going in and adding some black, which I quite like. Because among hatching, if you can add areas of actual black shadow, I think that really complements it. It sets it off quite well. And that's what I'm doing at the moment. It's just touching up certain parts. And it's just a case of trying to find what works and what doesn't. So again, it's with the little places where you're trying to find balance and trying to think, where will the shadow collect and where will the light not get to. And it's not got to be too realistic, because it is a cartoonish depiction of a head disappearing through books. But to have a semblance of reality to it adds to the enjoyment of the image. Trying to picture some sense of natural law being in place in this picture. This is again slightly off screen, but you can see what I'm doing. I'm hatching around the bottom of a bar of the base of the chair, where you have the wheels on this metal frame. And then, because I've got so many items on the desk and I've got the shape of the body, it's all sort of floating on the page. There's still too much white, really. The one thing which I did really grow to appreciate is the more white that you leave behind, the more it looks like it's standing up and off the page, and the more dark that you can introduce to a drawing or hatch in mid-tone, the more you can start to develop a more sensitive relationship between what is catching the light and what is dipped into shadow, and the in-betweens of those two. It may seem obvious, I'm not sure. For me it was a revelation to realise that you can really go overboard with the hatching and then try to pull it back. But if you don't pull it back, then it's just overboard. It's a strange thing where you have to go further than too far in order to recover a drawing where you've gone messy. Whereas if you don't go too far, you have to try and stop at a point where you've got a nice balanced drawing that doesn't require more depth and shadow, and you can get away with both. It's a weird balancing. It's not always a science. It's not something where you can say this plus this equals that, or this subtracted that equals that. It might be, but I don't believe I found anything where it really itemizes what works and what doesn't that specifically. It's really just a trial and error process. And as much as there are tons of examples from the past of artists who do this masterfully, you don't get to see their failures. You get to see the masterful work. So you may get an inaccurate impression of how consistent they were at successfully rendering an image. I mean, some people are just masterful at it, but I imagine that they've been doing it for many years, like, Heinrich Kley, I believe, and Dürer is another one. And I mean, there are tons. I really like Picasso's The Frugal Meal, which is an etching, I think, and that's similar to me to an ink drawing, an etching, because it's all just marks. And I really appreciate work like that, and it also shows how well he drew before he started to become more abstract, which again it just means that it validates his abstraction in my mind. I could be wrong there, but I think I'm not alone in that idea that someone who can draw figurative work becoming abstract is more admirable than someone who works abstract and has never worked figurative, who it may be unfairly, but you sometimes have a question of, is this because they don't know how to do work that is representational or figurative? And I don't know if it's important whether they do or don't. Maybe it's not important that they don't know how to do things representational or figurative. It depends on how well they do abstraction, and that's a matter of taste. This is all the things which you wrestle with, and you really wish that there were right and wrong answers, but there aren't. Some people love things which I can't stand, and some people can't stand things which I love. It's one of those where what is right? You try to look for a consensus and try to think, am I right? Am I crazy? Is this not brilliant, or is this not rubbish? It's the same with your own work. Is this good? Is this rubbish? Is this just scribbling? Should I be doing something more substantive? To me, this feels great because it's an outlet for my frustration. It's a time capsule for this point in the fine art course where I'm studying and feeling lost in the text. And it's also not the worst image in my opinion, but I could be wrong. It could be, a terrible ink drawing. And I just quite like it because it's something which I've drawn. And you can be so biased for your own work sometimes that you don't see how bad it is. So maybe this is absolute rubbish, and if so, then I'm sorry to make you suffer through a half-hour long video of me making a rubbish drawing, but I quite like it. There's things about it which I think are quite charming. I mean, it's my own work, so I feel terrible saying that, but you know what I mean. It's not the worst piece. It's something which I'm glad I did, and as I said, I'm going to continue with this type of drawing in this book, because so far I've done an ink drawing not too dissimilar to this, but with a different pen on the page before this page, and I did another one after this page, and I filmed the page afterwards. I didn't film the page beforehand because I just didn't, and I think it was real frustration that I was letting out. Whereas the page afterwards, I was more comfortable filming that frustration being let out, because I was confident that if I use the same pen and I keep the same style of drawing, and they are a different style to this one, with the different pen it's more cartoony than this one because it's the brush pen, and I purposely characterise and stylise the characters as almost children's book characters, but in a slightly grotesque setting because of how I was feeling at the time. And I don't dislike it, so I'm going to continue with both the fountain pen sketches in this book and with the flexible nib. It's called a brush pen by Stedler, which is what I use for the page before this and the page after this. And that's how I'm going to finish off this book. But I haven't yet, because I'm still stuck in a fine art course where you don't do work like this. But in between, I'm going to try and do bits like this and upload them to YouTube. Now, I hope you've enjoyed this video. I appreciate you watching, anyone who has watched all the way through and listened to me mumble my way through the video. I appreciate you viewing it, and I hope that you enjoyed the video. Things like this are something which I'd like to do a lot more of, and if you'd like it, please leave a comment saying so, and if not, leave a comment. I don't mind feedback either way, really. Depends what you say, but I suppose it's going to be interesting to get any comments. I rarely get comments on videos, so if you'd like to, please leave me a comment, and I'd love to read it. And if you like the video, then please leave a like, and obviously I'd very much appreciate you subscribing to the channel. And I will, if I can, deliver more work like this, but I'd also like to explore a bit of painting and a bit of travel, a bit of filmmaking. I don't mean travel far, I just mean day trips in my car around North Wales, just to show you where I'm going, or anywhere else in the country. But for now, I think, unless I pick the pen up again, I think that's pretty much... Oh, I picked it up again. I'm getting a bit more shadow. There's always more that you spot afterwards where you think, wait a minute, this is not going to be catching so much light. And that's what I do here. I try to make sure that if you're looking up the trouser leg, then there's going to be shadow up the trouser leg, and I'd like to add that. And then I've gone quite dark on the shadow around the trousers, so I try to balance a bit more in there. And then that, I think, is the finished drawing. I really like drawing with the fountain pen, as I've said a couple of times already, so I might do another one of those soon. And that's it. This is drawing that I did in December. That's the bleed through onto the other page. And it's currently, I'm recording this in February, 14th of February that I'm recording this audio. So that's that drawing finished. I hope you enjoyed it. Again, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you again soon.